If you look at African spirituality, within the African spirituality, we have a spiritual ontology that explains the nature of the mind. So we know from the African spirituality that the mind is spiritual. Why? Because we understand in our indigenous ontology that we are spiritual beings. And then we understand that spirit can speak to your mind.
Okay, now you have said how we look at mind based on African spirituality, but that is not the only way we look at mind now in Africa. This perhaps is also based on the education that we are giving. Because I'm thinking that maybe somebody need to understand the distinction between these two conventions, these two ways of looking at mind and therefore the reality.
Memories, according to biblical psychology, is purely spiritual. So your spirit stores your memory. And that's why it is important. Now, the limitation of the conventional psychodynamic theory is that it believes that our subconscious mind, we are doomed.
Hi, and thank you for checking out Obehi Podcast. We encourage people to own their story and share it with the world to expand their purpose. Before we start this presentation, I have something to quickly share with you. Are you a purpose-driven entrepreneur? Do you want to cut across the noise and attract your ideal client by leveraging your own story? Then pay attention. I have a signature program that can help you own your story. A 5-step transformative journey to reshape your professional and business narrative for success in less than 90 days. And it's available at academy.aclasses.org/story. This is what we have understood. Storytelling is the most powerful instrument known to man. And this is what that could mean to you. You can either own your story and use it to advance your purpose in your business and professional life, or someone else will do. The choice is yours. Now let's get started with today's episode of the Obehi Podcast.
Good morning, viewers across the globe. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Oluwafemi Esan. I'm the principal consultant at the Transpersonal Mental Health Clinic. I'm also the pioneer and the vice chancellor of Aero London Academy / Aero London University. I'm also the professor of biblical psychology and transpersonal psychology. So today, we'll be looking at a very important concept about the mind, that is what we call the stronghold. So today's presentation will be a combination of theology and psychology. Today, as I said earlier on in my introduction, we'll be looking at a concept of spiritual strongholds in the mind with the aim of exposing the negative spirit of the mind. Now, there's an important concept here. The threshold concept that we are looking at today is the very idea of spirit of the mind. And this is so much in opposition to conventional psychology that is built on dualism of the mind and the body. So, and that ontology of the conventional psychology is built on a materialistic ontology. That is, the seed mind as an interaction of material matter. So consciousness is viewed from this materialistic ontology as a material entity. Therefore, the conventional psychology did not have a framework to explain the spiritual nature of the mind. So, and here today, we are going to talk about the spiritual strongholds in the mind based on the concept of the spiritual nature of the mind, and also exposing to us today the very negative spirit of the mind and how this affects human life and human behavior. Let's have some definitions. Now, the spirit of the mind, coming from biblical psychology here, the spirit of the mind is the inner power that directs and governs the mind, and it refers to a believer's thought and attitude. Now, the phrase be renewed in the spirit of your mind appears in Ephesians 4:23. Now, biblical psychology established the concept, or what I call the theory, of the spirit of the mind. Now, this concept clearly shows that the mind is controlled by spiritual nature of its essence. So, in essence, mind is not matter, and it's not a materialistic aspect only. So there's the mind that is within the body that connects to the brain, the neuropsychology and neuroscience. However, the spirituality of the mind said your mind is essentially spiritual in its nature, and the spirit of the mind is the power that directs and governs the mind, and it refers to your thoughts and your attitude. Now, here again, it also introduced the concept of the nature of thought. Conventional cognitive psychology did not look at thought as just spiritual. They see thought as purely neuropsychology. They see thought for coming from neuroscience and neuroanatomy of the brain and the mind. Okay. However, biblical psychology is establishing a fundamental concept and principle that human thought are spiritual in its nature. I will say at this junction also, to lay this foundation clearly, that our thoughts can come from two sources. I'm going to quickly share with us this very diagram here. If you look at this diagram, the human soul is where it accommodates the mind, the will, and the emotion. And if you look at this diagram here, this is what we call the tripartite nature of man, the trichotomy concept, theology of man. So man is a spirit, he has a soul, he lives in a body. Now you will understand from this picture that there's a realm of the spirit that exists, and there's a realm of the world, that is the material world existing. So man is walking in a duality of reality, spiritual realm and the physical realm. Okay. Now, human thought can be initiated from these two dimension of reality. So your thought can be initiated by stimuli from your ecological system, that is your ecosystem, your environment. So through your sensory organs. Okay, so a thought can be initiated from the dimension, that is from what you see, what you hear, what you feel can start a thought. And also it can also start internally through your internal nervous system, your organs of your body. Movement in your physiology can also initiate thought. So, but that dimension of initiation is coming from the material world. So either through my body, or through my existence in the world, in my ecosystem here. So you can see, but those two initiations of thought is coming from the material reality of life. However, what we find out that conventional psychology has failed us to accommodate is the spiritual reality of origin of thought. Ladies and gentlemen, thought can be initiated by stimuli from spiritual realm. And you can see from this diagram, your spirit can receive stimuli that will initiate a thought in your spirit, and it goes into your mind. Now, this is very profound to understand and to explain certain behaviors in humanity that conventional psychology failed to accommodate. So we now see in the spiritual realm here, there are forces that can initiate stimuli, can originate from the spiritual realm into your spiritual self, and this thought now move into your mind, into your soul from this diagram. And there is also exchange, input and output from your spirit to the spiritual realm. Now, this is fundamental to understanding the spiritual nature of the mind. Okay. Not only that, this is also very fundamental to understand that in the spiritual realm, there are good spirits, the spirit of God, and there are also evil spirits in the spiritual realm that can put evil thought into the mind of people. For example, people with chronic, I use the word chronic depression that lasts for months, is coming from a spiritual realm. Not every depression is spiritual, but chronic one. Then if you now look at schizophrenia, people that see spirit and they hear voices, where is it coming from? Spiritual realm. And suicide thought, the thought to kill yourself, and it's overwhelming to people that experience that. Where is that thought coming from? Spiritual realm. Spiritual realm. And this is the framework to explain this serious mental health issue, that neuropsychology, that conventional psychology only cannot solve those problems. And that is what we are looking today. The spirit of the mind, how the mind is affected by spiritual thought from the realm of the spirit. This is very important. And this is very, very important in today's world. We are living in a world that certain behavior is shocking. Certain behavior, you wonder, what comes over a man to pick up gun, start killing innocent children? What comes over a man to put poison and kill his wife? What comes over, all, look, currently in London, we have crisis of knife crime. Teenagers, 12 years old, 13-year-old boys, killing each other. What will enter into the mind of a 13-year-old to pick knife and start stabbing people, stabbing innocent people? Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the world to understand that conventional cannot solve this problem we are facing in the world today. It is now for the world to understand that we need a framework that understand and accommodate the spirituality of the mind. So we can sit down and begin to think. A 12-year-old boy, a 13-year-old boy killing each other, teenage knife crime on the increase. What enter into their mind? Where is the origin of this thinking? And that's why I'm presenting this very episode today, for the world to know and to understand, until we come to the reality that there is spiritual dimension of thinking, that thought can be initiated from the realm of the spirit. An evil thought, there is a satanic thought that exists in that dimension, and that put thought into the mind of people, and this thought now become a stronghold and now begin to affect their behavior. And then we are seeing all these deaths and killings in our world today, and it's so shocking. And because the world failed to understand that there's a spiritual realm that initiates thinking. What about the increase in depression? Chronic depression happened today in the world today. In fact, the World Health Organization said by 2030, the number one health condition in both developed world and developing world is going to be what? Depression. Chronic depression is on the increase. Despite the fact of material comfort, where is that thought is coming from? Hopelessness. When you look at suicide rate as well, it's so sad. Suicide rate on the increase, even in the developing world, and on the increase in underdeveloped world. What is suicide thought pattern? Where is the origin of this thought pattern coming to the mind of people to take their own life? That thought is coming from the spiritual realm. And that is the reason why this framework explains, biblical psychology and transpersonal psychology, for me, is the answer to accommodate that. Now, the biblical psychology clearly states here, be renewed in the spirit of your mind. See, the mind is spiritual in its nature, and the spirit of the mind, as from this definition, is an inner power that directs and governs the mind. So when people, for example, persistent thought of suicide is a power, is a force that is governing their thinking. Why? That force is purely spiritual in its nature. These people, because I've had family members and I have clients that have gone through this experience in my work as a therapist, and they keep on telling us the same story. Both people that are religious and non-religious that have gone through episodes of suicide thought, they will say, they will hear that thought constantly telling them to take their life, telling them there is no reason for them to exist. Where is that thought coming from? That's a spirit, the spirit of the mind, okay? And that spirit has so much power that directs and governs the mind. And that is so powerful. And we can see this from the psychodynamic theory, that where does this spirit of the mind reside in the psychodynamic theory? It is in the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind, as you know, has 90% power of the mind. In the subconscious mind, it is where this spirit operates. And if you look at the psychodynamic theory of the mind, the subconscious mind or the unconscious mind is 95%. And there we have our beliefs, our long-term memory, our imagination. Again, controls all the system in the body. That is the psychosomatic effect. Where I'm going is the programming. The subconscious mind has a program that controls the personality of every human being. Your behavior, your value system, your dominant thought is there's a programming in your subconscious mind. And because the mind is spiritual in its nature, according to biblical psychology, there is a spiritual entity and influence that program the mind of people. That's why you see people with addictions. People with addictions, they are addicted to a way of life, and it's killing them. And they will tell you, and they will say to you, oh, I can't help it. Why? They've been programmed. There's a programming by the spirit of the mind that direct and control their thinking and their thought and their attitude. And so we need to approach it from a spiritual intervention. So the intervention and the therapy that we are now putting forward is an intervention that is built around spirituality, because you cannot use medication to stop spiritual interference. I will say that again. You cannot use medication to stop spiritual interference. So because that person going through that thing, there is a spirit of the mind that's affecting, and they are overwhelmed, they are addicted. So they need a combination of spiritual intervention and the use of biomedical approach as well. And that's what we're saying, that not just only medication will solve this problem, because we can see over the years, it is not solving the problem. It's only dealing with the symptom. And that's why today's podcast is for us to go to the root of addictive behavior, chronic depression, schizophrenia, and suicide thought pattern. This particular podcast today is for you to understand, to be enlightened about the framework of how this chronic depression, schizophrenia, people saying things and hearing voices, suicide thought can be approached from a combination of biblical psychology and conventional psychology. We need the two together to solve this problem for the world today. Okay. Again, spirit of the mind. It is possible to appear spiritually renewed without actually being so. So we're talking about the spirit of the mind. Now, let's not talk about stronghold, because that is the core concept of today's podcast. Biblical psychology introduced the concept of a spiritual stronghold, which is a habitual pattern of thought that can be harmful and destructive. It can be a mental block or an argument against God's knowledge and truth of life. What's it? A stronghold is habitual pattern of thought. You see that? Thought. Look at people going through self-harming, hurting themselves, self-hatred. Where is that thought coming from? And that's the question. And they are so overwhelmed to this very thought that they go ahead and execute it. This is what biblical psychology is talking about, a stronghold. Now, let's see examples. Examples include conflict, arrogant attitude, harmful thought, patterns. Now, idea that oppose God's intention, and messages from the outside world that have left a lasting impression on Christian minds and non-Christian minds and heart. So, if you look at here, messages from the outside world, where is it coming from? Let's go back to this diagram. Look at it. The spirit realm can send messages into your spirit, into your mind. And these messages can be negative and can be positive. But I'm focusing on the negative one today to explain this mental health issue that people are going through, the chronic depression, schizophrenia, persistent suicide thought pattern. Messages from the outside world. Which world? The spirit realm. That's it. That is very, very important. So what we do in our clinic here, we use the biopsychosocial model. Okay? The biopsychosocial spiritual model that looks at assessment of the client from this 4 dimension. You look at the biological, because it also affects, if there is any imbalance in this 4 domain, it can trigger this mental illness. What we notice and what we are talking now is the fact that the spiritual was excluded from the conventional. Now, some therapeutic intervention are now bringing the spirituality into it, but they are putting it there as a support network, not as a source and the root cause of this problem. And with our experience and evidence in our clinic, what we're seeing, there are spiritual entities that cause chronic depression, schizophrenia, suicide thought pattern. So we use this model to assess in this 4 domain. We look at the biological, the psychological. So we are not discarding the conventional psychological therapies. No, we integrate it. We look at the social context of that client and then the spiritual. Okay. So this is a model. It's an integrated model that we use to look at this. And that is very, very important for us. Again, what is stronghold? Stronghold can be religious. People have a very faulty concept about God, about religion. It's also another stronghold. We have noticed that in the issue of wars, in this world we live today, religion has become a major problem. Many wars have been fought, are still fighting based on stronghold of religion, religious ideologies that are stronghold controlling the mind of people. It can be opinion, it can be doctrine. There are many religious strongholds, wrong, false doctrine, erroneous doctrine that has become a stronghold in the mind of people that hold them bound, okay, preventing them from seeing the true light. We are also strongholds of opinion. You can have a very strong opinion that is negative about yourself and about others. So how does this stronghold build? Because of our time. I love this quote from Elizabeth Elliot. Spiritual stronghold begin with a thought. Watch this. One thought becomes a consideration. A consideration develops into an attitude, which leads then to action. You see that? An action repeated becomes a habit. Let's start again. The genesis of stronghold. Spiritual strongholds begin with what? A thought. A thought from the spiritual realm. You see that? A thought from the outside world messages. And in this case, we're talking about a thought from a demonic negative influence of a spiritual entity, sending a thought to the mind of an individual. When that thought becomes a consideration, they begin to ponder that thought. That consideration now develops into what? An attitude, which leads then to action. Action repeated, watch this, becomes a habit. A habit establishes a power base for the enemy. Here, that enemy now is a spiritual entity we're talking about, and is sending that thought to the mind of that individual. And that is a stronghold. I love this. That is the anatomy and the genesis of stronghold. And you can see this in our world today. It doesn't mean that it's only religious people. Any behavior that has led to destruction of lives and property, any kind of behavior that has led to the destruction of lives and property, and the individual is constantly behaving repeatedly, habitual, perpetual behavior of destruction, either to themselves or to people in their surrounding, they are operating under a stronghold. And that has to be dealt with spiritually. There's one stronghold I really want to talk about before we leave that is affecting us in the third world. And that is the stronghold from the colonial trauma. Yeah. Operating what we call the slave mentality. A case in time, we use the grasshopper complex from biblical historical theology. It was the story of the Israelites. They spent 430 years in slavery. Watch this. in spite of the promises of God for them about a land flowing with milk and honey. What happened to these people? Look at their story. I'm going to close with this. In Numbers 13, verse 33, this is the report. When they went they sent 12 spies to look at the land. Watch this. There we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, are part of Nephilim, and we were like grasshopper. Now watch this. Look at their report. Look at their self-assessment. They said we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. You see that? And so we were in their sight. It means that the spies felt like imposters, losing their faith in themselves and in their God. Do you see it? When an individual, you lose your faith in yourself and in the God that you believe. In other words, their slave mentality caused the nation of Israel to believe they were unable to possess what God has promised them. It was their false identity that empowered unbelief and allowed their fear to rule them. Unbelief and fear are debilitating. This is what they find out in former colonies. Colonial trauma does this to us in the third world. What is colonial trauma? Colonial trauma refers to the psychological and political effect of colonial oppression and the ways in which the history of colonization affects people today. And one of them is what? Intergenerational trauma. Colonial trauma can be passed down through generations. That is it. And look at us in the third world today. We are still suffering from colonial trauma because what we observe is the fact that people don't believe in themselves. They don't believe in themselves. They don't believe in their own ability to achieve their goal when in comparison to the Westerners. So we constantly looking for the validation and the approval from the colonial masters. We don't believe in our own product and our creativity. When an indigenous company start producing a product, people would rather go for what? The one from the Western world, ignoring and pursuing and purchasing and consuming our own indigenous product. We import solutions from outside the continent. Why? We don't believe in our own solution. And we forget that African solution is for Africa. But what has happened? We are suffering from a grasshopper complex. True unbelief. We don't believe in ourselves. You see an average African person with a PhD also suffering from low self-esteem. You wonder, with all the PhD, the academic qualification he has, expertise he has acquired, but he doesn't believe in himself when it comes to comparison with people from the Western world. When they come to that arena, when they come to international labor market, or even when we travel abroad, we see this example a lot in people in diaspora that we doubt ourselves. We doubt ourselves. We don't believe in ourselves, even in spite of opportunity. What is happening? Grasshopper complex. And it's a stronghold of the mind that we need to break off. So in other words, we see that the Israelites were a good example of being tied to the past. And that's what colonial trauma does to us, tied us to the past. Not being able to look ahead with what God had for them in the present, they still had a slave mentality. 12 spies were sent out and they found that the land to be productive just as God has promised, but 10 of the 12 were shaken with fear, the fear of failure. After all, the Canaanites had walled cities. The Israelites were accustomed to tent. Oh, they were giants in the land. And they couldn't move on into the future that God has for them. One thing that has been confirmed through science is the fact that the pain experienced by our ancestors can be passed down to future generations through epigenetics. Yes. This means that the experience of trauma can leave a mark on a person's genes. Isn't that true? Look at how many years ago that slavery was abolished. But see, look at us in the third world, even in the diaspora. We are still carrying this pain of colonial trauma in our genes. And it's time to break it. And because it is spiritual. And that's what we established today in this podcast today by the concept of biblical psychology, that the spirit of the mind. So we have to deal with this grasshopper complex in the third world, in the mind of former colonies, spiritually, so that we can be delivered from the limitations of the colonial trauma. What I'm putting forward, my argument is that colonial trauma must be dealt through spirituality. And that is what I call spiritual emancipation.
Now, the first question I want to ask you, Professor Oluwafemi, is where is this idea coming from? Maybe that is where we need to start from. Of course, we have more other things to deal with along the line. But if you could tell us where this idea of spiritual stronghold of the mind, where is it coming from?
I would say the origin of spirituality of the mind, with due respect, I'm not even going to attribute that to the influx of Christianity from the colonial master. No. If you look at African spirituality, okay, within the African spirituality, we have a spiritual ontology that explains the nature of the mind. So we know from the African spirituality that the mind is spiritual. Why? Because we understand in our indigenous ontology that we are spiritual beings. And then we understand that spirit can speak to your mind. So it has always been within the fabric of our value system and our spiritual ontology in Africa before biblical psychology was introduced to us by the colonial master. Thank you.
That is very important now, because of course that responded to the question I also wanted to ask you, because I wanted you to speak to whether the mind is actually purely spiritual or neuropsychological. I wanted you to say something more about that, because now, of course, through our education, the way that we perceive mind, which is slightly different from what you have explained based on African spirituality, is a concept that a lot of people have. But I would like you to also say something more about that. Okay, now you have said how we look at mind based on African spirituality, but that is not the only way we look at mind now in Africa. This perhaps is also based on the education that we are giving. Because I'm thinking that maybe somebody need to understand the distinction between these two conventions, these two ways of looking at mind and therefore the reality. Well, I'm saying that because the mind, as one speaker or one quote has it, is a terrible thing to lose, because everything is actually taking place in the mind. It is said that the war is won or lost in the mind.
Yes. So the mind, as you said, of course, there's a neuropsychology of the mind, and there is also spirituality of the mind. Because as you can see from that analogy, man is a tripartite being. Man is a spirit, he has a soul, he lives in a body. Okay, so the body affects the mind through what? Our brain. Okay, so that is the neuropsychology aspect of the mind. That is, and that's why we have this psychosomatic effect. However, the mind is also located in the spirituality of the soul. Okay, so based on that spirituality, you can see that the mind exerts psychosomatic effect, and the spiritual nature of the mind is the ground to explain how we can receive stimuli from the outside world, how we can receive stimuli from the spiritual realm of reality. And if you look at even in the area of creativity and innovation, most of the inventions that have changed the world today, people that are all these inventors, if you look at their history, they had a quantum leap into extraterrestrial knowledge and inspiration. And that inspiration is what brought solution to humanity. So you can look at that inspiration. Where is it coming from? It is beyond the reservoir and the ability of the cognitive and intellectual reservoir. So they had an enlightenment. All of a sudden, the eureka, light came in. Where is that sort of light? It's coming from spiritual realm. So this concept has been operating over the years. Thank you.
For people who read the book, The Science of Getting Rich, and also another book similar to that, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. I believe that they will get to a point where Napoleon Hill was actually making reference to the mind, looking at it that it was possible for him to actually connect to the ancestors of the Americans. And he was saying that he could actually literally summon Thomas Jefferson and ask him, how did you do certain thing? How did you do this? Or show me. Of course, Thomas Jefferson was dead many years in 1910, or in the time that Napoleon Hill was writing the book. So we can see now that we're not really talking about just the physical. I think somehow many people are beginning to wake up to the idea that life is just beyond the physical. And I think you are saying something also very important there when you look at the event of people who often have to tap into a source. And this source is not you. You are not a source. You are tapping into a source bigger than you.
Yes. Yes.
There you get the knowledge to be able to execute. And I think that is a level that we don't usually operate on a regular scale. But sometimes we are able to tap into that source and we're able to do something extraordinary. But of course, it doesn't always mean that we are going to be inventing. We might be finding a solution to a problem between two villages, for example. You don't know how to find a solution. Now you go to sleep. In your sleep, your mind travels to a place. And when you wake up the following day, the solution comes. It doesn't mean that it's going to be all the spirits in the air now and they are beating out something. This quantum leap, could you please say something more about that? Because now what I am seeing is that it is not only hidden in Paris or in London or in New York. Right down in my village, people can tap into this quantum leap anywhere. Please say more about that.
Yes, I mean, when you look at the question of source, you've introduced a very important ontological foundation there. What and where does thought come from? What is a source of knowledge? Of course, I mean, transpersonal psychologists, we believe that source is coming from what? Ultimate reality. And that ultimate reality is God. And is the source of every knowledge. Now, you can tap into that knowledge from different religious traditions. I can say that to you. Tapping into it is not confined to a particular religious tradition. No. Why? Every human being is a spirit, and every human being, we are all part of the same universal consciousness. And that is coming from the philosophy of creationism. That is, there is a creative and creator, a supernatural being that created every human being. Now, every human being is a spirit. They don't need to be in anybody's religious tradition and a religious community to experience that spiritual inspiration and to tap into that spiritual knowledge that is beyond the brain and intellectual capacity. Why? We are all spirits and we have access to that consciousness. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that again. That is really lovely. And of course, later in the conversation, I have some questions I'm going to ask you when we talk about mental health and the whole lot of that and the mind again, because that is fundamentally important for us in the diaspora. I'm talking of the Africans in the diaspora, but of course, it's applicable to many other people. But for us, based on what we are going through, it is important we understand these dimensions. But now somebody is wondering, why should I even care? Because we're talking about the spiritual stronghold of the mind today. Somebody is therefore wondering, I don't even know why I should care about this topic. If somebody were to ask you that, what would you say?
Yeah, it is lack of understanding of our essential nature, who we are. You know, the dominant concept of self that operates in the world today is based on materialism. And most people are not aware of the reality of the spiritual realm that influence and control the physical world. See, whether we like it or not, there is a realm called spiritual realm. We know that in Africa, before the religion came to us, and we know that the spiritual realm controls the physical. So the individual must be aware of that, because in your neighborhood, you may have an issue. Somebody can start killing people in your neighborhood. Somebody can become a pedophile in your neighborhood. Somebody can become an addictive alcoholic in your neighborhood that will now begin to have effect on the safety and the security of everybody in that neighborhood. So understanding the spiritual aspect of how the mind can be under the bondage of a spiritual entity that now confirm then to a negative behavior is very important for all of us. It's for all our safety. And we are seeing the increase of that behavior around the world now. Therefore, we need to understand that there's a spiritual realm and it influences people's behavior in the world that we live today. Thank you.
Looking at the mind as you are a therapist, but also a psychologist, what is actually the best way to use our mind? What would you recommend?
The best way to use our mind, you see the model that we use in our clinic, the biopsychosocial spiritual model, biology, social, psychology, and spiritual. That 4 domain is what we need for a healthy mindset. Okay. And so we need to feed our mind on spiritual nutrients that we need for our sound mental health. Now, we argue, one of the theses or the premise of our thesis is based on the fact that building spiritual resilience is a gateway for mental resilience. Any mental resilience that you build outside spiritual fortification of your mind will crumble. It's just a matter of time. And therefore, we need a balanced diet of spiritual health and physical health. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm very happy that you made mention of the balance there. And anyway, you already responded to this, so I'm not really asking you to respond to what I'm going to say now, because I know you already said that, which is that being able to connect to the source doesn't mean you must belong to a particular religion. No. Irrespective of what you believe as your higher self, you can tap into the source, because you cannot be here without that higher self. Because there are just so many things that cannot be explained. You cannot explain how you even come to be. Okay, you can deduce some information, no? But there are some things that are just beyond our imagination. That sometimes we just need to leave it to what have been before us. Like, for example, what have our ancestors been saying before, because they too have questioned the thing. Since the time of ancient Egyptians, the question of religions have been debated time and again. So that we can also debate if we want to. Is it really true? Is God really there? We can continue to talk about it if we want to. But if we are wise, we should take advice from those who have been here before us, because they only live for a certain amount of time, and we too will live for a certain amount of time. We are not going to be able to really dissect life based on our own experience alone. We are just like a little small dot in the book of life. So maybe we need to learn from others so that we can live maybe more healthily. Now, where I'm really going here is that, okay, I don't want to go back to what Napoleon Hill was saying in his book, because he is saying that I can literally today summon my ancestors and consult with them. That led me to the question of how are we supposed to intentionally connect to this source so that when we have issue, we can find a solution to that problem. I mean, the intentionality of this transition. Please speak to us about that.
We cannot separate religion from spirituality. Okay, there is spirituality in religion, and this is where religious traditional practices comes in, in form of systems or ritualistic practices that initiate the contact with the higher self. Okay, for example, me, I'm a Pentecostal ordained reverend. I believe in the person of the Holy Spirit. I was baptized in the Holy Spirit in 1985 at the age of 11. Okay, so my own way to initiate contact with God is through the person of the Holy Spirit. You see that? So and that is coming from a spiritual philosophy based on the Christian Pentecostal tradition. So that is where the issue of religion comes in. But religion is different from spirituality, because you can be religious and not spiritual. However, you have to take spirituality from religion. So also, because when you now understand this concept that I'm a spirit, I don't need to be in a religious environment before I tap into the potential of my spiritual self.
Thank you for that. That is very good. I think we need to keep on hammering on that, because I think what that does for people is actually liberate the people. And I think that is fundamentally important. But I want also to spend a few seconds on the subconscious.
Yes.
Is it really purely spiritual, or is there another way to understand it?
It's like cloud. It's like cloud. It's store. You see? Cloud storage. That is where you store. So, and the cloud, can you see this cloud? Can you see it? But it's stored there. It's the same principle. But you can draw from that storage, and that is the subconscious. You can't see it, but it's real. All our memories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, are stored in the subconscious. However, because memories are stored in the subconscious and they carry the element of spirituality. Memories, according to biblical psychology, is purely spiritual. So your spirit stores your memory. And that's why it is important. Now, the limitation of the conventional psychodynamic theory is that it believes that our subconscious mind, we are doomed. Is a determinism. It determines our life. No. When you understand that your spirit is higher than your subconscious mind, so your higher self to your spiritual self and interaction with the higher power, you can remove the limitation effect of memory stored in your subconscious. That is what I believe.
Now, I'm going to share a story with you, and I would like you to respond to it. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book that I titled Finding Your Life Purpose. Now, in this book, I made mention of subconscious, and I refer to it like a super hybrid database that we need to tap into for us to be able to find our way, because I was saying we are not able to live enough to be able to gather the information. Therefore, we need to trust the information that is already available. We need to tap into it. Look at in the Sahara Desert, there is an antelope, there is water, and there is a lion. The antelope is going to take water so that they can drink and, of course, be alive. Otherwise, it's going to die. Only that just before the antelope gets into the stream to get water, he realized that there is a lion somewhere. Now, I say, in this triangle of event, let's freeze the time and examine what is happening here. I say, what is happening in the mind of the antelope? What is the antelope going to do? Is it going to go to take the water? Or why is it not going to take the water? What is happening here? I say, okay, now the antelope is going to make a very fast calculation. Because why is it going to be very fast? Because if you make a mistake, it's going to die. The life depends on the decision it's going to make. Yes. And I say again, but where is the antelope going to get the data from? Because the antelope doesn't live enough yet to be able to gather all the data of life. But I say the antelope is going to tap into the source, what is already known. But how does it know? Because it's part of existence. The lion have been having an encounter with the antelope. So the antelope is going to know that, and he's going to now ask himself, do I need to be part of this experiment or do I need to run away? But how is it going to know that? It's going to calculate the distance between itself, the antelope, where it is, the lion, and the water. If the lion is too far away, meaning that the lion might want to catch it, but he will not be able to run to meet it based on the distance, he can go to take the water and then run away after. But if based on the distance, he cannot take the water and run away before the lion catches up with it, then it's going to run away because he wants to save his life. I said, what is happening here is that it is important for us to tap into the super hybrid database, because if we don't do, we will use our life for experiment. And of course, nature is going to gather everything again for other people who are going to be wise enough to tap into that source. This is how I was just explaining. Of course, it's longer than that, but I want your reaction on that.
Now, there are two ways you can learn in life, okay? You can learn from observation, okay? And it is very hard way to learn from experience, because you may end up being the victim of that experience. So the antelope must have learned from observation seeing how the lion has killed former antelope from observation. Now, that observation and that learning is stored in the subconscious mind of the antelope. And that now informs his judgment. He's aware of the danger. Now he's assessing. He has to assess his environment and calculate, if I go for this water and drink this water, what will happen to me? What are the distance and the presence of the predator? Now, what is that telling us? That learning that is stored in our mind can be used to apply to solve present situations, learning from experience, learning from observation of the past. But the problem with humanity is that people continue to make the same mistake and they never learn from observation and experience, called apathy. Thank you.
This is very important, because later, when I'm writing my 5-part book series, The Storytelling Mastery, I will go back again to make reference to about the same situation, but differently this time. Because I'm talking about storytelling, the importance of storytelling in our life. And I'm saying that, of course, in the book, and I still say it continuously in our storytelling series, that it's not that storytelling is one of the most important things that we have known. It's actually the most important thing that we know. As I take, for example, the food. How do you know that this food is food? You know it is food because people like you have been eating it before. I said, pay attention. People that have tested this food, they have to pay with their own life because they didn't know what it is. Therefore, if you are eating this food, it means you are standing on the shoulder of giants, those who have tested it before, which is the story of what have been before you. You even know what the meaning of name because you are part of a group who told you that. You didn't know all this one just on your own. So knowing the story of who you are, where you are coming from, your ancestors, what they have done, how they get to this place can be really, really very important for us. Just like, for example, in the case of the antelope.
It's the same thing when you look at biblical psychology. I call it historical theology. So there's storytelling. So the writer of that Bible chapter is telling the story of the Jewish people, which I use in my presentation. So if that story is not recorded, how will we learn? And sir, let me put it across to all the Christians listening to us, that the Israelites actually suffer from colonial trauma from the Egyptians. That, people, there are, over the years, there are many interpretations of that verse. Most people have not looked at the colonial trauma that the Israelites went through. They were in slavery for 430 years. They have been traumatized. Their self-esteem and their self-concept and their self-identity has been eroded by 430 years of slavery. And then you expect them to go to the promised land. No, they suffer from that. And that is what storytelling does to us. We look at that story. What do we learn from this story? What can we gain from this story? What can we apply to our present situation? So that is storytelling in the Bible.
Thank you for that. I'm happy that you made mention of that. Thank you. All right, now let's come back to the diaspora again. Let's look at some practical situation, what we are seeing around us. Because during the conversation, you made mention of a lot of schizophrenia, of depression, chronic depression, and all of that.
Yeah.
Now, when we are examining a situation, how do we know whether this situation is as a result of spiritual encounter or a neuropsychological situation? How do we know that? Yeah.
Assessment. We call it assessment. So you look at the biopsychosocial spiritual model. So you have 4 domain of assessment: spiritual assessment, biological assessment, social assessment, and psychological assessment. It's from that assessment, initial assessment by the counselor, that will now give you the information to arrive. Just like when you go for a diagnostic test, this person has to be assessed, but they have to be assessed on those 4 dimensions. So we need counselors that are trained to undergo spiritual assessment, and that is what we are providing. We see that gap, and that's what our university is providing. How you become a spiritual counselor, that you can assess people spiritually based on their history and their journey, so that can be part of their prognosis for an holistic treatment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Of course, we are always very happy to have you here to break this down for the people. And of course, those who want to take it further, they can always reach out to you for that. And that is a good advantage that we have here. All right, now I have another question for you. The stronghold or the spiritual stronghold on the mind. Somebody might be wondering, What really are the challenges that we are talking about here? In that, if people don't pay attention to this, or if somebody is suffering from this situation, what danger do they run? I mean, what are the danger of not understanding the spiritual stronghold of the mind?
Let's look at self-harming. Self-harming as under split personality disorder. You see that somebody is constantly engaging in self-harming. Where is that thought coming from? How can you sit down and begin to harm yourself and cut yourself? Where is that habit coming from? You see that? So, conventional psychology, what is the explanation for that behavior? Okay, it can come from, neuropsychology, hormonal imbalance, they use, that is also based on what? The material source of reality. So they are using the physiological explanation of the neuroscience and the neuroanatomy to explain self-harming. But we can tell you that individual, they are constantly hearing something that has led to a mindset of self-hatred. How can you hate yourself? The mind is under bondage. There's a spiritual control, the mind. That's what we're saying.
Spiritual control. All right. Now,
Yes.
as a psychologist, why do you think it is impossible to rule out the spiritual aspect of maybe the suicidal thoughts and this situation that we are looking at now that have to do with the imbalance of the mind? Why do you think it is impossible to rule out the spiritual aspect of it?
I mean, it's not impossible. I mean, there are various schools of thought that are using that in different countries, depending on the power that's be. But what we find that, as you know, is that the dominant hegemony of knowledge is also politically influenced. And the dominant philosophy of knowledge is coming from an ontological foundation of materialism. So it's a dominant. And so people are used to explore psychology from an ontology of materialism. And that's what is happening.
Okay, at this point, I think it is important for people to understand what is actually the difference or the main difference between conventional psychology and spiritual psychology. Yeah.
So conventional psychology is built on the dualism of the mind and the body, and that all matter, including consciousness, is based on material interaction. So the ontological foundation of conventional psychology is a materialistic ontology. However, spiritual psychology is based on the ontology of creationism, that is, the creator and the existence of everything, both non-living thing and living thing, spiritual and physical. There's a creator, and that creator is ultimate reality, and it's a spiritual God. It's a spirit. And that is the difference between spiritual psychology and conventional psychology.
Now, we have heard of the idea of programming the mind or reprogramming the mind for some. When you consider those thoughts, of course, this is something that is happening within psychology, because there is no way you're going to program somebody's mind without psychology, because you are basically dealing with the framing of the person. Is that happening within the realm of spiritual psychology or conventional psychology, or both?
No, it's both, because your mind can be programmed by your experience of the past. And that's what the subconscious mind does. We have an experience, trauma. And don't forget, there is trauma in the subconscious mind that is influencing the programming of your mind. If you have experienced trauma, it affects your sense of self and your self-belief. And therefore, you have a program of negative self-image, okay? Self-doubt. It's a programming. It's coming from a childhood traumatic experience. But what we find out that old programming can also be solved by conventional psychology through, for example, cognitive behavioral psychology, extending your thought with new thought and new way of thinking. However, when that programming is chronic and is habitual, then you explore the spiritual dimension. That's it.
All right. One thing I also appreciate a lot about your approach is that you are not really ruling out the conventional psychology, which I found to be really very interesting, because new way of thought for most people, they usually enter with the denegation of the previous one and say, okay, mine is the only way. Every other way is wrong. And that is really harming for us, because we end up destroying everything that is not part of this. Later, we'll come to realize that, this is not 100% what it is. Then something is missing. But now, what we have destroyed, it becomes difficult for us to be able to bring it back. Instead, I like your approach that everything is part of everything. We need to include everything for the betterment of the human being and also the society. I think
Absolutely.
this is really very important. But I think maybe somebody might be wondering now. Uh, you are talking of the spiritual influence of somebody having maybe suicidal thought or things like that, or maybe looking
Mm,
at the imbalance. Let me just put that in a kind of a general sense now, that there is a
mm,
malfunctioning of the mind of the person. Therefore, we are looking
mhm,
for explanation to it. For somebody who does
mm,
not believe in the spiritual philosophy or the biblical philosophy, like the way you usually would present it, he
mm,
might say, well, if we say the thing is spirit or spiritual, I'm not able to
mhm.
control that. Therefore, I'm sort of losing my power in it. I cannot take pee, I cannot take medicine to sort of cure me. So I'm not in control of that. So that is limiting for me. If somebody were to present that argument to you, what would you say?
Yes, and that's why, thank you for that question. You are responsible for your knowledge. Ignorance is not an excuse. Okay. We live in a knowledge driven economy. So you need to educate yourself. Now, the tool that we use in our clinic, we use root cause analysis, problem analysis. Okay. That framework tells you if there's a problem, use the tree analysis, the branches, the trunk, and the root cause. We look at the root cause. Now, using the biopsychosocial spiritual model, the root cause can be in the psychological, it can be in the social, it can be in the biological, it can be in the spiritual. That's our approach. It's root cause analysis. We have to look at the root cause of this person's case. And sometimes you don't assume that it's spiritual or until you carry out what? The analysis of the root cause using assessment questions to find out that, okay, this is where this is coming from. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate you. I appreciate the conversation today. Spiritual
Okay, sir.
stronghold of the mind. Now,
Mm,
what are the solutions? For somebody that have listened to this point and they want to know how they can maybe solve the problem that they find themselves or have a better knowledge, what should they do? What
yeah.
do you recommend?
So, yeah, you have the way you look after your physical health, okay? You have to look after your spiritual health. That's it. Our thesis is based on the premise that mental resilience without spiritual resilience is not complete. To have mental resilience, to be able to cope with the pressure of this world, you need to build a solid base of spiritual resilience coming from a well-nourished spiritual health. That is, you must eat nourish spiritual food. That's it. Feeding your spirit to be spiritually healthy. That's it.
What is an example of this? Now, of course, if you were to share example with this, you would
Mm,
read the Bible for me, okay? I understand that because that is, you're a Christian. And of course, you
mm,
have also made mention of the fact that there are different ways to tap
mhm,
into this source, to have a
mhm,
spiritual rooting on your, so that you can
mhm,
really have a good understanding of where you are.
mm,
Is it
mm.
possible that we could suggest this to somebody coming from an African spirituality? I would tell the person, do this, then do that, then everything will be okay.
You cannot teach somebody spirituality.
Thank you
You
so
can't
much
teach
for that.
somebody spirituality. you know, and also the moment you are giving codes of conduct, it becomes authoritarian spirituality, and that can lead to religious trauma. You see that when you prescribe a code of conduct, because spirituality is not methodological. Spirituality is essential who you are. It's your identity. And that is what I said. The world is suffering from ontological crisis because our identity is operating on materialist ontology. So you are spiritual. That's the first thing. Understanding I'm a spirit. That is it. Living in the reality and the consciousness of the Father. I'm a spirit. I exist in this body. However, my spiritual consciousness and existence transcend time and space. That you don't need anybody to teach you that. You don't need any code of conduct or any regulated system. That is religion. So this is what we need to teach, that you are a spirit. And right where you are, viewer, listen to me. You can connect with God right now because you are a spirit.
So much. This is one of the most beautiful things I've heard, no? And
Thank you.
it's a line with this idea that spirituality must be liberating. If somebody is telling you
Yes.
this is what you need to do, you need to read this and read that, and do this and do that. it become enslavement. So thank you so much for that. That
Yes.
is really very beautiful. I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right. So what would be your final thought here to conclude this really beautiful conversation today?
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity once again, my brother. My final thought is your spiritual food. Every human must feed their spiritual self. You need a healthy spiritual self. As we conduct our physical health check, we need to conduct our spiritual health check. And this is what we teach in our clinic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I really do. And of course, the viewers, I believe that you have got a good information from today's encounter with Professor Oluwafemi. Of course, you can see that he is prepared for it and is ready to help you if you are ready. Of course, he's also preparing a lot of packages that are coming. His books are coming. His training are available that you can check out at London University. You see, there are all this information that are available for you, but nobody is going to do it for you. I like what Professor Oluwafemi said a while ago, that nobody is going to really teach you. Maybe they can show you the way, but you are going to be the one to do the work. If you want to move from point A to point B, except maybe you are dead or you are lame, you are on your bed, people can really carry you on their shoulder. Other than that, what you should ask people is, show me how. You know, I have a philosophy that is very strong in me. Many people who know me very well understand this is how I operate. I don't like to do for you. I like to show you how. So that what I know how to do, any person wake me up and say, oh, please show me how. I am more in tune to that than you come to tell me, do it for me. The reason is this. If I do it for you today, I will still do it for you tomorrow. I will still do it for you the day after tomorrow. So I'm neither helping you nor helping the society. He said, if I teach you how to do it, I've helped you, but I've also freed myself. Now you can also help other people. And it just go on and on and on and on. So yes, take advantage of Professor Oluwafemi present. Ask him any question on how you want to move on. And it's willing and ready to show you. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you so much, Professor Oluwafemi. And thank you so much, brother.
Thank you.